All right, you're good to get started.
Okay, well, we'll start. Welcome to this panel on the Directed Studies program at Yale. We're thrilled to be here talking about this program with you today. So I just want to introduce the group that we've got here. So we've got Professor Brian Garstin, who is the chair of the Humanities program and also a professor in the Political Science department. I'm Katja Lindskog. I'm the Director of Undergraduate Studies for the Directed Studies program. So I'm basically the director of the program. And then we have a wonderful group of current students and one former DSA who some of you will have encountered at previous events. And so we have James Hahn, Eliza Spinner, Katie Taylor, Ben Beckman, and Nico Taylor, who's a former DSA. And then we have two Daniels for the price of one, Daniel Ma and Daniel Hinojosa. I'm going to first just hand over to Professor Garstin, who's going to say a few words to kind of introduce you to things that we think matter about the program, and then I'll say a couple of things as well.
Thanks, Katja, and hi, everyone. I've been teaching in the program for 15 or 16 years on and off. And I've also been lucky enough to talk with alumni of the program over the years. And I'm here to share some of what really the alumni tend to say about having done the program. They all use the same word to describe it: formative. They say it was the formative academic experience of their lives, in fact. And when I press on them, what exactly about the experience worked, because we don't want to change that. One of them said this back to me: how would you want to start college? Wouldn't it be great to start with a small seminar with a professor so you could actually get to know a professor? Well, what if you could do that 6 times during the first year of college? And what if you could be part of a cohort of students who had a real experience together, an intense experience? That is, yes, they read the books and they wrote the papers and hopefully they learned the material, but they also felt that they had gone through something together, not just because the course is hard, but because it's challenging in the ideas. The writing is challenging. The reading is challenging. Everyone writes papers on Thursday nights together. And so you just develop a sense of being a part of something, even in the moments when you don't like that something. So alumni really refer to this community, the shared experience, and it sticks with them. They come back to campus decades later. Some of them write long, single-spaced letters referring to readings they had done when they were 18, 19 years old. They are unpredictable in what they learn from the course. So some will go on to study classics because they love Plato or Homer. A well-known writer now said that actually he was turned on to studying India and the subcontinent, not because we read texts from it, but because it came up in a number of texts and they became curious. We have journalists and judges and business people. An alum who sells real estate in Chicago wrote me the longest single-spaced letter full of references to books about why DS was crucial to understanding people and therefore crucial to his career. We have scientists who go into labs and become doctors. It's really astonishing and kind of humbling, actually, to talk to the alumni of the program. So I always like to remind people of that, people who are thinking of just starting this experience, how it seems to people 40, 50 years later. I think I would focus your attention when thinking about directed studies on that question: how do you want to start college? Wouldn't it be great if you could have the intensity of connections with professors, with faculty? We have lots of support to help you learn to write well, especially designated writing tutors and all of that. But I honestly think it's the connection, not so much with us or with the writing tutors. It's actually the connection of the students with each other that sticks with people over the years. So I'll let the students talk to that because they're more qualified. But I just want to say how happy we are to contemplate a new group starting, even in these unusual conditions. And I'll stick around and be able to answer questions as they come up later on. So let me hand it back to you, Professor Linskog.
Thank you so much, Brian, for that. So thank you for those very inspiring words. And for those of you watching and listening in right now, feel free to just send through your questions and they'll be passed on to us, and we'll try and answer as many as we can at the end. So we'll have a sort of conversation amongst each other ourselves first, and then we'll get to the Q&A portion. But please feel free to start sending them now if you have them. I'll be very brief in my own remarks because I want to start this conversation as soon as possible. But I just want to add some thoughts to what Professor Garsten said about really why, this experience is so formative. And he addressed some of the possible reasons for that. I just want to add one thing, which is what I find most interesting and also most challenging about being in the world of DS. These texts that we read are often, very famous, and they have at times been put on a pedestal as examples of something, almost perfect, right? So a perfect thought or perfect rhetoric, perfect literary achievement, and so on. But I think once you join this program, you quickly realize that this is not a helpful approach to these texts and ideas that you absolutely love. They're not role models, right, of how to act or how to think. But nor are they there simply as something to resist or tear apart. It's not necessarily helpful to hold up these texts as something to, just reject and say these values are not ours, and nor is it helpful to just kind of look at them with awe and worship, right? So in short, neither of these options present real engagements with what we read, in my view. My dream for students in DS coming into the program is that rather than treating any text or idea as either a role model or a whipping boy, students feel that they can approach these texts as something like collaborators, right? So as conversation partners, and I think what many philosophers would call an interlocutor to your conversation. And what that means, I think, is that these texts are here to challenge you and to help you think more, think better, be more, be better. And you'll end up, not coincidentally, also writing more and writing better. And so, take the first text that we read, for example. In my strand, I teach literature, the Iliad by Homer. It takes place within a culture of looting, of slavery, of greed, for sure. But that doesn't mean that the text is used as some sort of manual of how to acquire loot or how to find a city to sack. It's not a manual, it's a conversation partner that will push your thinking about power and grief and memory and family and literary form, and yes, also about looting and slavery and greed into areas that you've never ventured before. So my entreaty to you, if you decide to join us, is to say, welcome to the conversation and stay open to the conversation. Now, I want to introduce our panelists here today. We have Nico Taylor, who is a former student, and then we have the current students who all come here to join us. And I'm going to ask a series of questions to you all, and we'll have one or two students volunteering an answer to each question in the interest of time. So I'm going to start with the real basics here, which is what does a week in DS actually look like? So I find that often it's hard as a prospective student to get a handle on what you're actually expected to do and what it actually looks like on the ground once you join the program. What does a week for a DS student normally look like? And I guess we could maybe angle this question to, normally speaking, when we're all on campus and living normal lives outside the kind of current extraordinary circumstances. So up until March of this year, what did your normal week in DS look like? Who would like to jump in and just answer that one for us? I'm very happy to just pick a person. Great, Ben.
I could jump in on this one. So, hi, my name is Ben. I'm a first-year student in DS. In your typical DS week, in each of the three classes, which are literature, historical thought, and philosophy, you'll usually be assigned one book or selections from one text to read over the course of the week. And the whole course moves chronologically. So a lot of the times the courses that you're reading within one given week are actually like contemporary. The authors are contemporaries of each other. So when we're in ancient Greece reading Homer, we're also reading Plato philosophy and Herodotus in historical and political thought. And so there's this, not only is there like a dialogue between the authors that we're reading in our present times, but there's also this really fascinating dialogue that happens between the authors in any given week as it moves through time together. But in terms of an actual workload, so the reading, DS has a reputation for being a very high workload program. I can't say that the reading is easy to finish. In a given week, I would say it depends, but it can be between sort of 50 and 300 pages a class. So on your, I would say like that ends up averaging around 300 to 400 pages a week of reading were you to do it all, which is a struggle, but probably encouraged. And then on top of that, there tends to be an essay, essays as maybe 12 weeks in the semester. So during weeks, there's an essay that you have to write for one of the classes, and so the sort of for me, what I ended up doing was doing a lot of the reading for the coming week over the weekends, and then trying to start the essay before Thursday night. A lot of I would say all DSers know the feeling of starting your essay due Friday morning at maybe 7 p.m. On Thursday. It happens to all of us. But the workload is a lot, but it's also manageable if you don't procrastinate. So if you think about it, 300 to 400 pages of reading a week, if you divide it up by the day, is only 50 pages a day, 60 pages a day. More than that, 70 pages a day. But if you divide, it's yourself, it's really doable. Involved in extracurriculars this first year. I do a ton of things in music. I was in the Yale Symphony Orchestra and in a choir. And I found that despite a lot of other time commitments, this was easy. Made an effort and didn't and got things done when they needed to get. So that's what I have to say.
Thank you so much, Ben. I think we lost you a couple of times due to the Wi-Fi connection there, but I think hopefully most of you really got the gist there, which was Ben's refreshing honesty about when when papers might get started, which is probably what most people take away. But also just to kind of add even a more sort of basic account of the week in DS, which is that you have 3 lectures a week and you have 6 seminar meetings a week, right? For 3 classes, and then you usually write a paper at the end of the week due on Friday morning. And then of course there are some weeks that don't have papers in them, and very often then there's something else on the schedule, like a special event of some kind, like a visit from a prominent speaker or a theater outing or something else along those lines, maybe a visit to an art gallery or something, right? So the weeks are certainly full, and usually what's recommended is that you take 1 additional class outside your DS schedule, and that will make for a very full and very exciting first year indeed. And whether you want to take more than 1 additional class is something between you and your advisor. It's not something I would recommend most of the time, but that is really ultimately up to you and your advisor to decide what you think is possible. The rumors about the workloads, as Ben told us, they're true, but also to emphasize what he said, that I think that they are highly manageable, at least from what I can gather from my conversations with students. Okay, so I'm wondering then if 1 or 2 of you would like to speak to this question of a particular moment in your year of DS that stood out to you and that you'd like to share with us, and more particularly, why that moment stood out to you. So what what has been particularly meaningful to you? And it doesn't necessarily have to mean that it was something that was particularly wonderful. It could have been a really challenging moment too. But what would you say has been a moment that has seemed to you to be a particularly rich engagement with the program? So who would like to start us off? Yes, Eliza, wonderful.
So my name's Eliza, and I really love DS this year. I can't even say, it's even difficult for me to articulate how wonderful a program it's been. Definitely formative. In terms of one of my favorite moments, so every year at the end of the year we have, at the end of the semester we have final exams, which every class has. And I think a lot of us were pretty nervous about them, pretty stressed out. We had to review a lot of text. I was making pretty long study guides. But one idea I had was that I would gather a group of my friends from different classes. Katie's nodding because I think she was with, and I think James too. We had dinner together in a dining hall every night, the nights leading up to the final exams, and we talked about the texts. And I think one thing that I'll say is, Ben, you're totally right. It's a large workload, but you're not doing it alone. And you have 100 other students who want to work with you and collaborate with you. So as we're studying for these final exams, we were drawing from each other's ideas, and everyone had different in a lot of the groups that I was studying with, everyone had different professors. And so I got to hear what other professors made and what other students made of all of these concepts that we're reviewing. And I think that was sort of embody what DS means for me, which is that you're studying many, many years of texts from the West with people who care about these texts and who care about you. And those nights studying for those exams were with other people were probably my favorite DS moments.
Thank you, Eliza. That's really lovely. So I think that some ways that really helps to emphasize the Professor Garson's point before, that what is particularly formative about this program is maybe not so much the professors as much we like to think are indispensable, but really the cohort, right? It's the community of students doing this together, that you're really not alone in this project, which is wonderful. Would anyone else would like to volunteer? Yeah, James.
Yeah, and speaking also to like for me, an experience that did involve a professor that was really exciting. First semester, we read Ibn Tufayle's Hayvin Yaksan, which is an amazing philosophic novel. And working with my professor at the time, everyone in the class was really excited about the text. We all really liked reading it, but we were also quite confused, as is the case with a lot of the text, because they are challenging readings and no one's going to expect you to get even half of what's really going on in the text. But one of the really great experiences I think I had in that week of seminars was just going through with my professor and all of us just trying to figure out exactly what was going on. And it's really amazing to see a professor who studied a work for a very long time discover something new. And it's always, and I feel like that's something that actually happens a lot, seminar to seminar. And you'll realize that the amazing things about these texts is that not only do they draw all of us together because we're all working through as students, but your professors are also working through them every single time they teach it. And there's something very exciting about watching someone who's like, really, really brilliant professors work through these texts, because it's really exciting to think about like how much you can grow too, and how much more these texts are always going to give you. Because once you've read 60 or so books, but then you realize you can just keep coming back to them, and you can keep coming back to them for your whole lifetime, really. And it was just like that moment was super exciting for me and really made me excited to keep studying into the second semester.
Thank you, James. That's really lovely. And afterwards, I want to hear who this professor was. Katie.
So I completely agree with both what Eliza and James said. Those dinners were absolutely wonderful. And if I had to name one moment, it actually would have been the dinner after our philosophy exam last semester, because we were done. We had just taken these 3 exams that really do show you how much you've learned. Like that reading period, it's stressful, yes, and it was our first finals period at Yale. And so what does that really mean? What are these finals going to be? But at the end of it, you realize how much you know. And then to be able to go to dinner with all of your best friends and see, wow, people are not only brilliant, but so kind. So to have that sort of joy of that last dinner. It also was snowing, which didn't hurt. But even beyond sort of the individual moments, I love Thursday nights, which is kind of crazy. They're definitely stressful writing papers, but we had a little group of students who would always meet in Sterling, and now we meet over Zoom, and we talk through our papers and leave lots of Google Docs comments. And often I don't realize how much I'm enjoying them until afterward, but they've made me such a stronger writer just from learning from such brilliant people.
Thank you. That's really great. So I thought I would ask some of you to reflect on a question that we often and justifiably get in this program, which is that this is a program that mainly reads texts that come from what is nowadays considered one of many Western traditions, right? So I'm being quite sort of cautious here in my language, but that, you know, for good and ill, we have that reputation, and it's true to the extent that most of the texts that we read are today in some ways incorporated in something that is considered as belonging to Western culture, right? Or Western art, Western civilization, Western political ideologies of various kinds. So I was wondering if a couple of you could just kind of talk about that as, I mean, Professor Glass and I could talk about this until the cows come home, but I think that what prospective students would probably be more useful for them to hear is your thoughts on this, and what your own relationship is to this, and how you've chosen to deal with it, and how you've chosen to engage with it, and how you see that relationship going forward. Daniel Hinojosa, I was hoping we could start with you, because I know you've been thinking a lot about this through the year. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess the first thing to start off with is, I mean, just my own background. I know I came in wanting to do DS because I wanted to engage with this canon critically, not just individually with the text, but also like the whole, you know, meta narrative of the text linked together. And I think what drove me and what still makes me glad that I did this program is that, you know, you cannot be more like better at the criticism, more apt and more precise unless you've properly read and understood what the arguments are, right? So that's why this program's been very helpful to me, is considering it as a tradition of thought, which is in genuine conversation between the texts, you know, and being able to link, okay, well, here's where this argument is fleshed out, and here's where some of the, you know, kind of the flaws might begin to arise, and so that's a very helpful aspect of it. But if the problem arises, and as it definitely did for me, the problem arising consistently of, well, there is a consistent issue in terms of, I guess, you know, diversity, or, you know, this being an issue, that is, first off, just a massive conversation to be had on like, where does the solution lie? But I think that the students are not disengaged from that conversation at all. And I think that's what's key to consider is, and that's what made it so helpful for me. I mean, I just had the loveliest conversation with Zipporah the other day, who I'm sure some of the students might have been in contact with, and just having a conversation with somebody else who understands, but is also going through this kind of journey with you, is both very empowering and just motivating to continue prying at this question, right? And then there are, you know, some of the colloquia, you know, where hit this question very, very, very aptly, right? I think some are able to see the Adoro colloquium at all. Great, brilliant, right?
So I just want to interject that that's Professor Ainihia Edoro, who is at University of Wisconsin-Madison. So feel free to look her up after this. Yeah, sorry, carry on, Danny.
So what helps most absolutely with this question is knowing that, at least as massive as the question is, and as it seems almost endless, right? There's a bunch of people struggling with the questions with you, and are also taking time, you know, not to discount the text because the question exists, but to actually read the text because the question exists, right? So it's if that came out coherently. But okay, yeah, that's all I have to say on that.
That's great. Thank you so much, Daniel. That's lovely. Anyone else would like to add their thoughts? Daniel Ma.
Yeah. So I guess I thought about this when I was joining DS. I came into this with a more historical background and historical mode of thought. So I think from that perspective, this, for better or for worse, we live in a world that is highly dominated by this tradition. And understanding its origins, understanding what it has done for us, what we can do about it, and like just understanding what it is that has gotten us to where we are is not a bad thing. It's a very useful thing. And regardless of that, even like, of course, there's no like single Western tradition, but I would say like this is like a reasonable approximation of a core Western tradition. And every tradition is worth studying, including the Western tradition. So it's not like we're especially like elevating this tradition above all others, where this just happens to be the one we live mostly in. And they're all great works in their own right. And you get to, like Professor Linskog has said, like that, like have that intellectual partnership with these works. And it is worth it in the end. And once you're done with this, you can always, I plan to at least, like also look at other texts, because there's so many things that all tie together. There's the interactions between the like edges of the Western canon and the edges of other canons that actually have a great influence on them. And there's always more to see, and this is just the start.
Great, thank you. Yeah, Katie.
I also wanted to say that there's a lot more reading and discussion that goes on in DS than what's just in the syllabus or the syllabi for all three strands. So I also wanted to highlight all of the hard work of Daniel and Zipporah throughout the year, really spearheading a few new student-led initiatives that I've had the great fortune of sort of joining on to. So for example, we just held a colloquium about the place of women in the canon, jumping off of Virginia Woolf's To the Lighthouse. And seeing all of that come together has been absolutely amazing, and how receptive the faculty has been to having a group of students come up and say, hey, we have this really big question. Another one was climate change and Machiavelli and what we can learn from that. And so the conversation is so much more about the people you're having it with. And even if you approach the syllabi and sort of think, wow, this is a lot of, like, this reading is very much one type of reading. If you then come to it and say, hey, I think this would be a great other work to read in concert, I promise you'll find other students so excited to read it with you, a professor excited to talk about it with you, and all of the resources and scheduling to really sort of have an outside event as we have done this year.
Thank you. And we'll hear from Professor Garston as well, who wants to add a few things. But I think also I just want to say that Katie's being a bit too modest. She very much was instrumental in helping to organize this as well. But yeah.
Oh, I just wanted to say that, you know, people often come in thinking that the Western tradition or canon is one monolithic thing. But as the students have already described, we certainly treat critical questions about it as part of the course. They're supposed to be there. We encourage and support any student initiatives about them. And the reason for that is that that critical spirit is obviously part of what we're hoping to inculcate, and actually part of what we think the tradition already sets an example of. So if you're coming in expecting to get kind of the Western line on something, you're going to be sorely disappointed, because you'll read Homer, but you know, then you'll read Plato saying that the perfect city has to ban Homer. And soon after that, you'll read Aristotle. We call it a conversation. It's not, it's a knockdown, drag out battle. Aristotle telling you why Plato's wrong, and then Augustine saying why Aristotle's wrong, and then Hobbes, and then so on it goes. And so you're left having to make decisions yourself, because there's no line that's presented to you through these works. And certainly the criticism should go beyond even what the works we read does. But I think the example of that criticism is already meant to be a part of the course. And so we just support that spirit whenever we see it, whether it's inside the books or outside them. So I think it's important that people know that. And I think that's part of what gives the program its vitality.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. So with this all in mind, I'm wondering then, this might actually be a good time to turn to Nico Taylor, who is a veteran of DS here, who was in the DS program last year and has helped to arrange many events at the moment for Virtual Bulldog Days. And I'm wondering, Nico, if you could speak a little bit to life after DS, what you think it helps you to do, perhaps if there are things that it doesn't help you to do, if there are particular majors that you think are compatible and so on, and what your experience as part of a former cohort of DS has been.
Great, yeah, thank you for the question. I'm Nico, I'm a sophomore. I'm probably a humanities and philosophy major. So I have obviously continued with my DS studies in some way or another. I think that a lot of the time you'll find that DSers want to continue with that, and it's if what you want to continue doing is humanities and the kinds of things that you'll do in DS, obviously DS is going to be a phenomenal introduction and preparation for that. But apart from that and beyond that, beyond the scope of the humanities, DS I think is just a phenomenal introduction, preparation for college in general. We've talked about all of the challenging workload, the challenging reading load, the challenging papers, all of which teach you to read closely and efficiently and deeply, and they teach you to think and write critically. I think those are the two biggest things concretely that you can get out of DS, and those will serve you at any place that you want to go. A lot of people ask me whether or not you can do a STEM major while doing DS. The answer is absolutely. We have a lot of DSers who are going on to do STEM fields, who are going on to do math, who are going on to be pre-med. We have a number of pre-med students. I'm a humanities major, so I can't speak personally to those things, but we have ways to get in touch with those students to talk about the particularities of it. I know a lot of people worry whether they need to take Orgo their first year. It can basically all be done. The only thing I think, I just learned this recently, that cannot be done with DS is mechanical engineering. Apparently there's no way to get the credits done, so that is very unfortunate. Although I did recently hear about somebody who might have done it. It was all apocryphal. It was a rumor. But yeah, I mean, I think that it's, to return to Professor Garston's earlier point, how do you want to begin college? Not only is it an incredibly enjoyable introduction to college, it's an incredibly rigorous one too. In a lot of ways, it prepares you so well that I may be shooting myself in the foot here, but it kind of prepares you too well. It can kind of feel disappointing to get out of DS is what I'm trying to say. And it sets a very high bar. So I will say that it succeeds so much insofar as that it so much that it kind of fails. But yeah, does that help answer the question?
No, that's great. Thank you, Nico. Yeah, it's sort of on my agenda for the future, is that I would love to find a way to kind of help former DSers out of the sophomore slump, because I know that experience is quite common, right? Of sort of going out there and shopping classes and feeling like nothing quite sort of matches your expectations of, if you had a good time in DS, then, it's hard to find something that matches up to that afterwards. It's a good problem to have for us, but I would like students to have a good time at the rest of their college years too, right? So that's something on the agenda for the future. So one of the last questions that I have for you before we check to see whether there's any questions from our audience is, I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit to your experience of DS during the pandemic, and what you have felt about what has been going on. So some of this will be probably applicable to just being a university student or a Yale student during the pandemic, but also if there's anything in particular that has stood out to you about being a DS student during these extraordinary times that we live in. So Ben, why don't we start with you?
Hopefully my Wi-Fi doesn't shut down this time, but DS has been something that's been really valuable and somewhat of a thing to go towards in this time of real uncertainty. So I'll just start off by saying that I'm from Los Angeles. Maybe you can see my little California banner right there. And so my 9 a.m. classes have become 6 a.m. classes. And so I've been waking up at like 5:30 to go to my historical and political thought class each week. And every time I wake up at 5:45 and I'm like, oh God, why am I doing this? And every time I leave class thinking that was the most fantastic class, I was so engaged the entire time. I have a fantastic professor and I have fantastic peers in that class. And it also makes me do all the reading because, you know, it's a little frustrating to show up to a class that early and not really know what's going on. But that being said, in DS, we had these weekly essays. And in these essays, I've had a lot of time to think about how writers that we were reading in the DS syllabi might respond to the questions that we're facing today. And so DS has given me this fantastic opportunity to really reflect on a lot of the things that we're seeing now with reference to these older authors. So for literature, we discussed almost endlessly when we read Kafka's Metamorphosis about how Gregor's transformation into a bug and this total frame shift of view matches kind of somewhat of what we're going through right now. When we were reading, I was writing an essay on individualism in Tocqueville, and Tocqueville thinks about how the democratic spirit in America causes people to isolate themselves from public good, et cetera, that could lead to tyranny. And I was thinking about how, well, you know, maybe self-isolation poses a similar problem to the things that Tocqueville's writing about. And onwards. I know one of my final papers for my history and political thought class is just to take any 2 or 3 of the texts that we've read this year and to write about how they apply to current issues. And so DS has been such a fantastic way to look at the world, a fantastic lens to look at the world through, to think, well, maybe all of these crazy things that we've never seen before, you know, maybe there are things in what we have now that have been done before, and these older authors have a lot to offer to what we're dealing with now, and so that's been a really valuable experience dealing with in these past couple weeks.
Well, Ben, thank you. And my goodness, 5:45 wake-ups. That's intense. I know that wasn't the main point that you made, but I just wanted to say kudos to you. So anyone else would like to follow up about that, about their experience? Yeah, during the pandemic. Daniel.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess there's always, as soon as we came back, there was always the issue of like just all the things with Zoom University, just being difficult to concentrate and really do stuff at home on a computer, staring at a laptop all day. By the way, this one little note about DS is that we're asked to get a lot of books, and I think, so first off, yes, you do have to get a lot of books somehow. There are various ways of doing that, but yeah, James. But I think, yeah, just like a small thing, but being on Zoom really demonstrated that having the physical books is really useful, because trying to do DS readings on ebooks was not fun. Anyhow, but like more generally, I think it was just like the fact that we were all together and all of this community together made it very great, because we all could see each other again, and we were all like sort of in this similar setting, except not physically together, but there was this sense of community. And one of the things that I really enjoyed was the last day of classes, so 3 days ago, 2 of the historical and political thought professors decided to do like an extra seminar on Hegel. And that extra seminar went on for how long? I think it ended after 2 hours and 40 minutes, because we were so into it the whole time. And it was a great way of just wrapping up the semester, because we were all still together, still engaging, and a big push together despite the pandemic, and it was very inspiring. So just wanted to say that.
Yeah, that's wonderful, Daniel. And that was also, as it happens, the initiative of 2 historical and political thought professors who just felt that, you know, Hegel's lacking, and they couldn't handle the thought of people missing out on Hegel, so they launched launched into 2.5-hour conversation with you guys about it, which is, one of the things that I think I've found about my colleagues in this program is that, for better and worse, they feel so strongly and so passionately about people getting a chance to be exposed to these texts that they will go through fire to make it happen. Thank you so much. So we have a couple of questions coming in on the chat here. So I'm going to ask you some of them. So the particular question actually goes back to, I thought this was appropriate when Ben was talking, which is about the kinds of questions that a typical DS essay explores, which is a great question. So what kind of questions would you get to write about in a DS essay? There's obviously a variety. You guys all have been in different sections, and so I'm sure that there's been different expectations in those sections, right? But overall, let's start there. And the follow-up question, which is great also, if there are any essays that you've written that you particularly like, and if so, why? So Eliza, why don't we start here?
So one thing I would emphasize about the process of choosing something to write about is that the professors do give a lot of room to engage with what you're interested in. So I've never felt like I was limited to answering a prompt that I was not interested in. Last semester, I had a professor who was giving us like 12 prompts. So I think the prompts vary by professor and by section, but in general, you can engage with whatever you want to engage with, and professors are always very open to you saying, I want to write about this paragraph in this book. Even if the professor hasn't explicitly addressed it in class, you're pretty much free to write about what you want to write about in the text. That said, though, the writing is very much focused on the text. So there's a lot of close reading. The one thing that I've learned, I did not learn close reading in high school. Like I took AP Lit, AP like whatever. I did not learn to close read like how I learned to close read in DS. I've learned to like extract meaning from a text and keep reading it and keep reading it and keep finding things. And I've come up with some, if I do say so myself, some pretty interesting ideas of just because DS has pushed me to read very closely. That said, there isn't as much, I guess maybe in the later essays, my most recent essays, I've been doing this more, but for the majority of the course, for the most part, I haven't been making grand realizations about the world in general. It is very textual focused. So if you're less interested in engaging with a specific text, I think maybe social science classes might be more so for you. So that's maybe the caveat I would give. But in general, I've really enjoyed writing my essays. I derive a great sense of pride from turning it in. And I have a huge body of work. I guess I've written 18 essays. Well, 17 at this point. I'm still writing Professor Linskog's essay, which is due today. But I've generated a massive body of work that I'm really proud. I mean, I've been sharing it with my family. I sent my Descartes essay to my dad just because I was so proud of the work that I've generated. And that in and of itself, those 18 essays that you end the course with, that in and of itself is like an important body of work and something to be proud of.
Great, thank you. Katie.
One other thing on that is our professors are really good at asking questions. Like this is not a surprising thing for anyone, I don't think, because our professors generally are absolutely fantastic. But there've been a lot of times in which I either hadn't thought I would be interested in something or all of a sudden became interested in something because of the prompt I was given. In terms of the favorite essay, I think my favorite essay was actually, this is a very sort of DS experience. For Paradise Lost, I started reading it, did not like it at all. The first weekend I was texting my friends like, what are we doing? Blah, blah, blah. We get the essay prompts, and one of the essay prompts was contest the footnote. So one of our DS professors actually edited the edition of Paradise Lost that we were writing about. So this was crazy. You're looking at this scholar in the world of Shakespeare and Milton who's sitting across from you in lecture. And all of a sudden you're going to really engage with his argument about something so small. So my entire essay was about 5 lines of text between Satan and Eve in Paradise Lost. We also had amazing lectures that week. But by the end of it, it was one of my favorite texts we had read. And I was so proud of starting at one place with this work of why are we reading this? And then all of a sudden coming to the end and realizing just how much I had to learn from Professor Kasten, who had edited the book, from my professor, from the professors we heard from the lecture, and from just engaging myself so deeply in the text.
It's great. It's somewhat atypical that a prompt would just be sort of subtle trolling of one professor to another's work, but it's also a really, I think in some ways, a beautiful example of the sort of camaraderie that exists. I want to move on to the next question, just in the interest of time, because we've only got 15 minutes left. And it's a simple one, but also quite a hard one, I think, to answer, which is, why did you decide to take DS in the first place? And I imagine that there's quite a wide variety here, right, of reasons. You know, some of you didn't know it existed until you arrived on campus, and some of you maybe had planned it for 3 years, and but also the question of why, right? Why did you do it? So I'm wondering if one of you would like to speak to that, why you sort of felt like this was the program for you. James.
Yeah. DS was for me like one of the top reasons I came to Yale in the first place. I'm an econ and math major, so it doesn't pretty hardcore STEM, and it would seem that DS isn't the thing that would be very appropriate. But I think there's something very very important just for as an academic to really engage with these conflicting ideas, to engage with to really understand what it means to pick apart someone's argument, to be really precise. Especially, I think DS gives you just grounding for life skills in general. And in terms of changing the way you think, I think you have to be very methodical, very thoughtful, in order to really to make the most out of DS. And the great thing is you don't have to come into DS like that. You will become much more thoughtful, methodical, and precise by engaging with the DS program. I also wanted to be a much better writer, just because writing is one of those skills, one of the single biggest skills that can make can improve your life. And as Eliza pointed out, when you write 18 essays, you're going to get better because it's a sheer bit of practice. And then you're also getting feedback from professors who expect a really high quality of work. This isn't your high school essay anymore. And not even just compared to other essays for other classes, I think DS essays are also at a very high caliber. And that kind of environment was something I was really excited to be a part of, especially as someone who wants to, share research and things that I do within STEM. I think being a really great writer is a super important part of that. And we had a colloquium recently with Dr. Robert Shiller, who won the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2013, but also is very much engaged with the canon. And now a lot of his later research is dealing with the question of stories and tradition, and namely how these stories change economic events. What you'll find, I think, with DS and why I wanted it is that it is really universally applicable across any field. And I think it actually synthesizes especially well with STEM fields, because STEM doesn't exist in a vacuum. It exists in society, in a world steeped in tradition.
Thank you, James. That's great. And I think that also just reminds me that something that I want to emphasize as the director of this program, as somebody who sits there and sifting through applications, to our program and so on, is that we really want to emphasize that this is a program for anyone, regardless of your background. I love that you guys have been so honest about saying this and that in high school didn't prepare me for DS, but that's not a barrier, regardless of what your starting point is. If you come to Yale, we want you to apply, because it's not a program for people who have a background in classics, let's say. I mean, if you do, that's great, but it's not a prerequisite. There are no prerequisites in terms of proficiency or skills, or particularly in terms of knowledge or learning, that would, prevent you in any way from coming to join our program. So I just wanted to add that to what I feel like also hyper articulate at this point, and I also don't want to anyone to feel intimidated and think, oh, I must have this huge amount of knowledge when I come into the program, but it's just not the case. And in fact, sometimes it's actually helpful to start with the assumption that you don't know how to write an essay, let's say, or that you don't know how to approach close reading a particular text, because it might help you because you have fewer kind of moves to unlearn. Now, I think that there's a question for one audience participant called Lucy, which was about whether any of you were planning to study STEM and if DS has made you a better STEM student. I think that James, to some extent, helped answer that question. And unless there's somebody who wants to chime in on that question, I would go on to the next one, which is, what fourth class, so the class that's outside DS, did you take with your 3 DS classes each semester? Maybe I'll add something to that question, which is, what was your experience of the kind of do's and don'ts there of what you think is helpful to make the best use of your first year? If somebody would like to speak to that. Daniel Ma.
So this was actually a very large struggle for me because I'm not sure what major I'm doing yet, and I'm like somewhat torn between doing STEM things and not STEM things. So I spent a very large amount of time at the beginning of first semester trying to figure out what in the world I was going to do, and like there was a lot of questions about distribution requirements, question about like prerequisites and stuff. I ended up taking organic chemistry, first year organic chemistry with lab both semesters along as my fourth and a half, I guess, class. I think it worked out on the whole. I spent a lot of time just like in my room reading DS and enjoying it, and just like preparing, just resting and reading. And I think, I'm going to be honest, it did take up a lot of my time, but I think it was completely worth it in the end, because there is no other time in which I will ever be doing something like this. And training, like giving myself this expanded way of thinking, this new set of experiences and thoughts, that it's not really replaceable. And it's worth the, I think regardless of what fourth class you take, we all, like DS is intense. And but like, we're all still here, and it's worth the intensity, and that's the main thing. And by the way, for reference, taking organic chemistry with lab, anybody here is going to do that, is actually allowed, despite the fact that you will only have writing credits. Like, you won't have any of the other distribution credits, but that is allowed. Don't worry about it.
Yes,
that
I've
caused me a
heard
lot of
this
stress.
rumor that some people get the impression that it's not allowed somehow.
Yeah,
I'm glad you cleared
that caused me a lot of trouble. Just if anyone's doing that, it is allowed.
Yeah, Katie.
So this is the one random piece of DS advice that you might not get anywhere else that I think everyone should have. If at all possible, when scheduling your classes, avoid the 1 o'clock block, because half of DS is the DS lunch afterward. Of course, you have your seminars and they're amazing, but being able to go and have a meal with some of your best friends and talk about the works. I mean, you heard Eliza and I both talking about how much we loved our DS dinners. It's really important both for making friends, getting to college, and for sort of really getting through the works. If you can have that block of time, there were days in which I'd get out of lecture at 12:30 and then had a seminar at 2:30 and was at lunch the entire 2 hours. Just all of a sudden you look up and wow, I have to get to class. So if you can try and give yourself that luxury, you'll learn so much from it, and it's just so much more fun.
Thank you, Katie. That's the kind of piece of advice that I would never in a million years think to give, but that is really helpful to come from you. We have a couple of questions that I thought I would just fire off at you as we're wrapping up. So a very good one, which we're currently working on, which is for students interested in DS, whether it's possible to receive a reading list over the summer, and if there's any recommended reading to be done to ease into this reading intensive program. So maybe I'll just answer that quickly from my point of view first, which is that the way it should work and the way it normally does work is that you do once you have confirmed your spot in DS, that you do receive a reading list over the summer with particular editions that you should pick up and start to read. However, we've also been talking with the current cohort this year that not just because of the pandemic, but we were already talking about the possibility of maybe contextualizing that reading list a little bit more for the incoming cohort, right? So I know Katie and I have had conversations, and some of you others have also been involved in these conversations about the possibility of maybe having more contact with the current cohort as you set yourself up to do some of that initial reading, so it doesn't just scare you to bits, right? And think, oh my gosh, how am I supposed to read Homer by myself over the summer, and everyone else will be understanding it much more than me. And so it can be helpful to just have some engagement with current students who can say, no, nobody else also understood it better than you. Here are some things that you might want to look out for as you embark on the kind of reading that you might never have done before. So that is all coming, never fear, right? And that's something that's on me and that I will help to arrange. So the next question is about other interests outside DS, right? They exist, and they even exist for this current cohort. I mean, Yale is in some ways, I think, really focused on extracurricular activities in many ways, right? And people are often defined by their incredibly strong investment in one club or interest or other, right? And I was wondering if one of you could maybe say a few words about how you found negotiating that alongside DS, and whether it's helped or hindered, or what's been your experience of that. Eliza.
I think it really depends on the person. I think some people are able to balance writing for multiple publications. So we have a lot of Yale Daily News writers who, Katie, who do DS. There are people who write for Politic, so there's a lot of people who write for publications. For me, I just knew that I wasn't going to be able, I did some self-reflecting over the summer, and I realized I was not going to be able to do that because it would just be too much writing for me. So I looked into other activities, and it's definitely possible to work a job while you do DS. I work at the Yale University Art Gallery. So if that's a concern that any of you guys have, it's definitely possible. And people do STEM related extracurriculars, people do research. And so I would say, I think you have to be honest with yourself, and you should not take on too much when you're thinking about taking on activities. And I think I encourage you over the summer, look up Yale I did a lot of this. Look up activities on that Yale students do. Look up what kind of interests you have and try to start already thinking about what kind of things you'd like to do. But you do have to be honest with yourself and manage your time right. And just be careful about getting yourself too involved in something that you might otherwise regret. Just be thoughtful about it is my advice. That said, it can definitely be done. And I would say all of us are very involved in some activities or other, like I think all of us are very extracurricularly involved.
Yeah, and so, I mean, this brings us back to Ben Beckman's comment, right? I mean, he is somebody who's involved in the Yale Symphony Orchestra, which is this incredible, orchestra that has a lot of very popular events on campus during the year. And I mean, I don't want to speak for you, but it's a big time commitment, right? And as is, many of these type of extracurriculars. And so I think that Eliza's point is a very good one, that it's really important to be honest with yourself and, see what something will have to give, right? But this is true regardless of whether you're going to do DS or not. I mean, something will have to give. If you take 4 classes that are all going to be interesting and absorbing and challenging, and you're going to do a bunch of extracurriculars, then you need to, figure out a list of priorities for yourself, right? And so that's true, I think, within or outside DS. Now, I just want to go to the final question that we have here, just to make sure that we actually answer them all before we're out of time, which is somebody who's wondering just about the writing component, how writing is taught through writing essays, and whether it's possible to get, do you get comments on drafts, or how does it work, when you are in the process of writing papers for professors. Obviously, this will vary hugely from class to class, right? But I'm wondering if somebody would like to just speak to that experience for themselves. Yeah, James.
Yeah, so like it will vary for sure from class to class, depending. Like I think the question of like how you get comments on drafts is probably, at least in my experience, I didn't have a lot of times when I go to office hours with the completed draft to have comments over. Like that's I think a very unusual experience. a lot of the time you would go to office hours with a general idea or like a rough outline, and you kind of run it by your professor. Does the argument make sense? Where can I keep developing it? I think a lot of the technical aspects of writing are going to come from your writing tutors and also your peers. I strongly recommend that everyone write essays with your friends, or at least have some people look over your essays in the process, just because you'll find that like by working with each other, your writing will all improve. And I think that's kind of more of like the pedagogical aspect of writing that we have in DS. I wouldn't say it's like you would ever sit down and do a class on, how do I construct the perfect body paragraph. But your friends will help you, your writing tutors will help you. And then when you get feedback back from an essay you've turned in, professors spend a lot of time trying to give you really great feedback. Use the feedback. And then, even in 3 essays a class, you'll see huge growth. As long as you really kind of pay attention to the process and really give it that kind of thought.
Great. And I'll just add to that this is so long ago that you guys won't even remember that back in the ancient days of August, September of last year, we did also, we do this on a yearly basis now, offer workshops on how to put together an essay in literature, or how to put together an essay in philosophy or in HP, right? So there are also other resources that come up through the year, and it's particularly front-loaded, of course, so that you can use these resources if you feel like you need them early on in the piece, right, to kind of get you going on starting to practice your writing. But it's also important to remember that it's a marathon, not a sprint, right? So you start handing in essays in September, but then you are going to keep writing essays until April of the following year, which means that your DS experience does not stand or fall with that first essay, but it's there to help you learn how to write the next one, right? Okay, so I think that we're pretty much out of time. So I just want to thank you all for, well, those of you who have been with us and watching today, and thank you so much to my student panelists and to Professor Garsten for joining me here today. And of course, don't forget that if you have any particular follow-up questions, you can always just contact me on the details given on our website. And feel free to shoot off any questions that you're wondering about. So thank you so much for joining us today.